On the 7th of February 2023, the government of Barbados gave notice of the legislation titled the Child Protection Bill 2023. On the 23rd of May 2023, parliamentary debate on this bill resumed. The Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Kirk Humphrey, proposed a motion to refer this bill to the Joint Select Parliamentary Committee on Social Sector and Environment. Barbadian jurist, international child's rights expert, and chair of the National Committee for Monitoring the Rights of the Child, Faith Marshall Harris, sought to provide Barbadians with context and information about the legislation. She believes Barbados must treat the protection of the rights of children as a national priority.
In terms of the protest, let me say first of all that we are all entitled to protest against whatever we think is not right, and I will be the first person to endorse any person's right to protest against something that they feel is going in the wrong direction. So basically my reaction is yes, you have a right to protest. On the other hand, I want to ensure that persons are not persuaded to do so based on lack of information or misinformation, on conspiracy theory, sometimes to my understanding, very ill-founded conspiracy theory. And I would want to be sure that people know exactly what they're protesting for, what they're protesting against, and what they hope to achieve. In terms of this particular protest, let me say I've been a little bit disturbed because, and if I go by the conversation that I've heard, and I must stress, I've not necessarily heard all the conversation, because I've just in the last couple of days returned from a stint in Geneva, Switzerland, where I go every 3 months to our sessions, which I would want the opportunity to explain what that is about at some point. But so I've come back to hear a lot of things that I realize are ill-founded, and it's a lot of misinformation about. So it seemed to me, from what I've picked up, that there seems to be a general expression of anger against the United Nations. And that is weird for me, because the United Nations are, in fact, it's for the entire world. So we're going to get, Barbados alone is angry with the rest of the world, apparently, because that's the United Nations. The United Nations is every country in the world. And so whatever is happening in the United Nations is happening by way of the General Assembly getting together and voting for various concepts and policies and programs. So, you know, and so unless we want to ask for a step out from the rest of the world, I'm not so sure what we can do in a situation is you have to work with, because it's everybody else around. I also have heard a lot of talk about legislation not recognizing parental rights or parents' rights, and that to me is strange. Basically, before I even get to dealing with the present draft, which let's say is draft, it's in select committee. Before we get there, let me say that all the legislation that we've had in Barbados relating to children has been founded on the fact that we ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1990. So basically, without expressly saying so, we have based more or less a lot of what we've done since then on that convention. And that convention was actually in lockstep with what we had decided in 1966 in our Constitution. That was the rights of every human being. And I'm having difficulty understanding why, if you mention child rights in any context, it is automatically contrary to parents' rights, because the convention itself is based on the fact that children's rights are derived from parents' rights. And it states it implicitly. It's not a question that I'm interpreting this way. Now, understand that in some cases it mentions family rather than parent, but we can take it that they're one the same. But it starts, so, and this is what is founded on, that the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. And it's the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So the convention is actually based on the fact that the family unit is the fundamental unit of society. It is also that the convention is also based on the fact that the conviction that the family as a fundamental group of society and a natural environment for the growth and well-being of all its members, and particularly children, should be afforded the necessary protection and assistance so that it can fully assume its responsibilities within the community. In other words, any legislation that the state brings about children is purely to assist the family and the parent, de facto, by extension, with the safeguarding, the protection, and the care of children. And then it goes on, it recognizes that the child, a recognition that the child, for the full and harmonious development of his or her personality, should grow up in a family environment, in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding. So that is the underpinnings of not only all the legislation we've done for children, but now explicitly stated in this coming legislation. Now, if you go through the legislation clause by clause, you're going to see everywhere the reference to nothing can be done without acknowledging the right of parents. Now, you just spelling out the word parents right somewhere in the law does not make it so. It is that at every step, the law has to ensure that that is implicit in what it does. So it seems to me as if someone wanted to say that what we should call the bill is parents, I don't know, parent protection, I don't know. But the fact that you say that it is child protection legislation doesn't mean that parents are not totally involved. But the point, though, that one has to understand, this legislation really affects a very small percentage of the population, because the majority of our population don't really abuse and exploit children. This legislation is about protecting children from those in our community, which exists in every community around the globe, who would abuse, exploit, neglect, or abandon children. And this is in relation to all adults, parents included, because sometimes parents are the persons who have done just that, abuse, exploit, neglect, or whatever. But it's not exclusively about them, it's any adult. And we have got to make sure we have legislation for that. This legislation is actually built on the legislation we've had all along that we've been living with. What this legislation does and seeks to perfect is that, first, it brings it up to date, because in the old legislation we wouldn't have contemplated cyberbullying and grooming and a lot of the new kinds of harms that children could be exposed to. But what it also does, though, is that it outlines clearly and limits the kind of authority that, say, a child protection agency such as the Child Care Board had, because what we would say is that authority was somewhat at large, because the limitations were not explicit. What this legislation does is that it sets out a number of provisions that any child protection agency has to fulfill in order to act, which means, therefore, that at any point a parent can question the actions taken by the child protection agency or the state, if you will. And we have to keep remembering that the final arbiter of all this is our courts. So unless you're beginning to question the validity of our courts and its judges, which I am not about to do, I think that I feel very safe in the hands of judges interpreting the best interests of child ensuring that the protection agency has not overstepped the mark. I think I can leave that safely in their hands to protect the interests of parents, of families, and all of us. The one of the things that I also want to emphasize is that the convention and, of course, the UN, the whole UN system, seeks to recognize the importance of the traditions and cultural values of all peoples. So whatever is done in the name of the UN or in the name of this convention, we have to respect local cultural norms and values, so that nothing happens unless that is also written into the picture. And I'm also going on to quote the convention, which, as I said, this legislation is based on, because the convention requires that state parties such as Barbados undertake to ensure that each child has protection and care as is necessary for the well-being, but this must be taken into account with the rights and duties of his or her parents. So there's not, in other words, if you go right through the convention, you would see that what state parties are being asked to do is to assist parents. Where parents can't perform their function totally, then the state then would have to take a child into care, but only, in our terms of our legislation, only after a considerable amount of process. And it's all settled in the legislation. So therefore, I didn't understand, why would we bring Barbados' name into disrepute to march against that? I say that because let's forget the rest of the world. Let's just take the Caribbean. Barbados has got to be the last country in the Caribbean right now to bring this modern child protection legislation. They've all done it, from here right up to the Caribbean chain, and we are one of the last. Because child protection legislation is one of the easiest things to pass anywhere in the world, because people have an instinctive feeling that children should be protected. And so this is somewhat unusual. Child protection legislation is what we call low-hanging fruit. That is that all countries, no matter how repressive, tend to, even if it's only on paper, make sure that they say that they're protecting children. So I don't know, as I said, how come we are somewhat stepping out of this process and stepping away from our own moorings that we have followed for the last few decades, several decades, I should say. Let me point out that this is no new or revolutionary situation. I've been involved with child rights from 2000, probably before some people before me were born. It's so long ago then that I was involved, and I have heard some pushback from persons when they heard that I have been nominated by Barbados to go to the CRC. It's a suggestion recently, I don't know how come, that I was a coroner sent to do this. Let me emphasize that while I was a coroner at one point, when I was nominated in 2018 to the committee, I had by then presided over the juvenile court, and this is where I got my first interest in child law and child rights. I had written several papers. First one pro bono with the help of UNICEF on juvenile justice. From there, I did consultancies with the World Bank, UNICEF, and a number of other persons, all on child law and child rights. And I had actually done a review of all the legislation with a view to harmonizing it to where we are now, and that was since 2013. I was invited to sit as the first as deputy chair of the National Committee on Rights of the Child in 2012, and then in 2014 became the chair of the National Committee right here in Barbados in 2014. And in 2018, in 2017, I actually went to Geneva with the then state delegation to present our report on Barbados's performance. And then it was recommended to sit on that committee because we realized that we did not have sufficient information. We needed to get to learn more about what we should be doing. I also noted something here where there was some suggestion that the reason why we have to protest against legislation like this is because it's driven by US/UN/EU agenda. Let me point out, first of all, that 196 countries ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, except for one country in the world, because all the countries in the world belong to the United Nations, the United States. They have not actually ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, although, strangely enough, they have ratified subsequent protocols. No, as you know, wherever you have big countries and little countries, as you have in the UN, there, yes, you can get, say, an agenda being driven, like a Eurocentric one, that can happen. But that is precisely why people like myself are nominated, because every country in the United Nations is eligible to nominate one of their nationals. Remember, I sit there, though, in my independent capacity, not representing Barbados per se, because I deal with all children across the globe. But the point is that the reason why smaller countries try to get onto such a committee is in order to protect the interests of small countries like ours, the SIDS and so on. And I actually focus my entire time, my commitment on the committee has been to protect the interests of small island developing states. I'm known for that in the committee. I also speak out for discrimination, racial, creed, race, color, class. I am known for that. I speak out on the basis of asylum-seeking and refugee children and children of minorities and indigenous peoples. Those are my big areas that I deal with, and education. And the point is that by going on a committee like this, and I'm only one of the 18 members from around the globe, and I think it has been painful to me for Barbados to be so angry that I sit on a committee, a global committee, of one of 18 people around the globe as a child rights expert. But it's a tremendous honor for a country of 166 square miles. And I speak up loudly, and you wouldn't believe that I'm coming from a country of 166 square miles, because my argument is that we have as much of a right to be heard. We have as much of a right to be part of not only the problem but the solution, and that if we are not there, we cannot really claim that we have been unjustly dealt with. So that is why what I do is to counter any agenda from the big people. And I just spent the last couple of weeks calling out the United Kingdom, where I was part of the review team on the illegal immigration bill, on their treatment of Black, Asian, and minority children. So that is really my role in a situation like this. And the 18 of us have come from as far-flung areas as Bhutan, Bulgaria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Belgium, Switzerland, of course, but the thing is that we are from all different countries around the world, and we obviously try to ensure that what comes out of the CRC is good for all children, and that is really my focus. Which of course means the good of the children of Barbados as well. And I want to emphasize, because I think that two other things that worry me is when I hear that there's some conflation with an IMF loan and what we do with our children. There is absolutely nothing to do between the CRC and those conventions and an IMF loan. There is no connection whatsoever, whether it's IMF, IDB. In fact, one may identify concerns, and we in the committee may sometimes identify concerns that have come about because of IMF, or we don't hold back. We speak out against whatever is a concern that we have. Right now we're speaking out against the Taliban in Afghanistan, who are preventing girls from getting an education. We're speaking out against the military in Myanmar, who are starving children and preventing them from getting an education. So we are usually against some of the big bullies, if you think those persons are big bullies. And finally, the thing that worried me is hearing that we are protesting against a national nutrition policy. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I am going to reveal my age here, my great antiquity. I remember the time when we used to have something called nutrition at school, when nutrition, it was then called nutrition as well, was supplied by the country. I am not sure if that has ended, because that used to be in primary school. But the reason why a country, and by the way, that's in convention too, that the state should aid with nutrition. But when a country observes that its population is probably making some poor nutritional choices, it has a duty to step in and offer advice. Now, I am hearing from all sides the reason why there's a protest is because parents know better than anybody else what to feed their children. I have to say in the common parlance, excuse me, if we also know that several parents themselves are dying young because they have chosen to eat very unhealthily and have chronic non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, then it suggests to me that some of us need some guidance and some help. And if the adults need it, that ought to be extended to children if we want to look after the most vulnerable in our community. I cannot see how a national nutrition policy invades anybody's parental right and personal space. You're just trying to, just as much as you go to a doctor to get advice, and the doctor says to you, well, I think you should stop eating so much salt or sugar or whatever, is by the same token, we have consulted our pediatricians and said, what is the best sort of diet for our children, bearing in mind, and this is worldwide, this is not Barbados. Worldwide, our children are becoming more obese, less fit, because they do less running around, they spend more screen time. So this is an attempt to right that balance. Let me say that I would like for Barbados to understand that we ought to be producing global citizens. And anything we do to impede their progress means that we will not have global citizens. We must be able to fit in with the rest of the world. And there is nothing to go at the legislation or the nutrition policy that's against our moral values. In fact, to protest against child protection is, I think, contrary to Barbados's values and moral standing. Because literally you're saying, and I am a Christian, one of the things that really runs through the Bible is the protection of the vulnerable, suffering the little children to come on to me. And that is the basis of the Christian religion, that you're looking after the weak, the weakest among you, the littlest among you. And we must protect them. And we will eventually, you'll hear me speak out when we have to move to protect the disabled, when we need to protect the elderly, any group in our community that needs the special support, we should be giving it to them. To protest child protection is to suggest to me that you do not accept that children can be vulnerable to abuse and exploitation, and that there should be special provisions to make sure that they're not exploited or abused.